Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn.
Yes,
Aaron,
sir.
I'll ask how you're doing, but I'm pretty sure it's as anxious as I am.
Yeah, I mean, so much so that I apparently ruined the intro graphic video that we normally do. This has been a bad week, Greg.
It's
I
not
am not
good.
prepared for this show at all.
We're all day
It's
to day
not
right
good.
now.
I'm day to day. My sign says it. I'm day to day. It's not good. I might not make it through this thing. Let's see.
Yeah, we're obviously going to spend some time going through all the different pieces here. The injury report, the elephant in the room is clearly Josh Allen. We know the UCL injury. We're going to talk about it a little bit with our guest here in a moment, but we'll get into some of the details later on. And
Yeah.
the crazy amount of research, I'm now like all the like family members I made fun of during like COVID of like, yeah, pretending to be a doctor and everything like that. I feel like I'm like an orthopedic surgeon, how much I know about the elbow ligaments now. And
Between my own ligament injury and now Josh's, I could probably pass for a physical therapist or something. No offense to anyone that's actually good at their job.
Someone who actually knows things
Yeah.
about medical. It shocks me how little I know about the human body every time I learn more
about everything.
But without further ado, let's actually get into tonight's
Let's do
topic,
it.
and we'll welcome our fantastic guest from the Pro Football Network, PFN 365. Our man Arif Hasan. How we doing, Arif?
Happening, man.
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
We're not good. He's lying. We're not good. You heard us.
It's just awful. It's absolutely terrible.
It's really
better
bad,
than I was on Monday.
Yes. Well, so obviously we're not going to just hijack the entire show with Josh Allen, but the range of emotions where there was a window of time where a fair amount of people were wondering, oh my God, does he have to have Tommy John surgery? Are we not only going to lose Josh Allen for the rest of this season, but oh my God, Tommy John surgery is 18 months. Are we losing him for all of next season too? And like this horrible process of like, well, one that's actually more baseball pitchers, not quarterbacks. And then, hey, if it was a complete tear, we would have been known by now because it would have come up on the first test and the first MRI. And so like, there's been quite a range of emotions that now getting back to the point of, oh my God, okay, it might only be a week or two is like this huge relief from where it had actually been.
Oh man.
It's stressful, man. It's a rough
time.
life.
Yeah.
Before we get into the fun of talking about this game and obviously Case Keenum Revenge Week, tell us a little bit about the Pro Football Network. I know when you and I last got together in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, you were with the Athletic and now have moved into the Pro Football Network. For anyone who hasn't seen it, you'll check in the feed, and I'll drop a link below. You had an awesome discussion with Trey Wingo about the Jeff Saturday decision earlier. Tell us about the new role and the new home.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I loved my time at the Athletic, a fantastic place to work. I don't have any issues with that. Definitely didn't want to leave, the Athletic because of what the Athletic is, what they stand for in terms of journalism and the people that they have. So when Pro Football Network, reached out to me and they were like, hey, do you want, to work in a lead NFL role? It's something I've been working for and towards for a long time. I write a lot about the Vikings, but I would also write a bunch of national level stories, including about, the development curve of Josh Allen, right? That was one of my more well-trafficked national stories. And so, that was, it was a difficult decision, right? But, I was able to talk to them. I talked to basically everybody in the leadership staff about kind of the vision that the Pro Football Network had. And one of the things that really appealed to me is that everyone there, especially in a decision-making role, has worked as a sports writer, right? And I think that really changes the discussions you have about the kind of stories that you want to pursue and the way that you need to structure and, things like budgeting, right? It's like, hey, should we do this? Should we do that? And I don't have to explain, in a lot of detail, like, I think that it makes a lot of sense to spend a bunch of crazy money to do this thing. And let me explain why. I don't have to like go through. They're just like, okay, actually that makes sense. Let's do it. Right. Or, like if I begin my pitch for half a story, they already pick up exactly where the story is going to go and where it leads. So having that kind of like integration in the way that the story works and the way that, reporting works, that was really exciting to me. And then of course, having an opportunity to talk about the NFL at large has been extremely fun. I've got a weekly column on Wednesday and on Monday about kind of the happenings around the league. One is a recap and the other one is just like, hey, this kind of thing caught my eye. Let's talk about it. Right. And just kind of having that freedom has been a ton of fun. They've given me a lot of latitude to write about the stuff that I want. One of the first stories I ever wrote for them actually was about the history of Nordic Vikings attacking a settlement in England, right? Because the Vikings were playing the Saints in England. And who else did the Vikings attack in England? Well, it was a monastery of saints. So I had to write that story. It was one of the first stories I wrote. And as soon as I told them, hey, I've got the story idea, they were like, yeah, absolutely. This sounds weird and crazy. Absolutely, you have to write it now. So yeah, that's the kind of fun I've been able to have writing for Pro Football Network and being able to connect with people like, Adam Beasley, who's my direct lead, or people like Dalton Miller, who do a ton of film work, or Trey Wingo, who has just this amazing ability with the mic and the ability to tell stories. And he's got all these connections around the league that he's able to talk about. It's been a ton of fun to talk a football at Pro Football Network.
No, we're super happy for it. It's awesome to be able to do and pull you back into some purple things for the night.
And bringing you back in sort of to the Vikings before we get into sides of the ball or anything like that. This team 7-1. Not everybody's believing in that. DVOA not totally on board with that. Has them more middle of the pack. PFF has them ahead of the Bills right now in terms of overall.
Yeah, something like third, right?
Yeah, they were third overall in terms of PFF. Nobody's really able to get sort of a read on who is this Vikings team. And I think, on the schedule with Josh Allen and the Bills was probably a measuring stick for who the Vikings,
would have
who
been.
are they? But now you might not get that. So who do you believe the Vikings are heading into this game? And now what's this game sort of mean if Josh Allen isn't going to go?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, and actually just wrote a piece about this, so I'm really glad that you asked, right? Just wrote a piece about who the Vikings are and what they can be. Fundamentally, the Vikings, I think, are a good team. But right now, that's kind of all they are, right? You've got, these three teams that I think everyone kind of agrees are elite, right? You've got the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Eagles, right? You've got a team that I think deserves to be knocking on that door with the return of Dak Prescott with the Dallas Cowboys, right? Like, I think that's basically what you have. You've got some pretty good teams that have the ability to kind of challenge, make things kind of spicy in those matchups. People like, maybe the Titans, what they were able to do with the Chiefs. People like the Ravens, that have the ability. And then I think right below that group of good teams that can challenge elite teams and elite teams, right below those two rows, I think are the Vikings, right? And that's also where you might find the Giants. That might be where you find the Jets. These are teams that are winning, but they don't really trust to be above 500 for the rest of the season necessarily, right? There's something about them where they're probably going to, find ways to win close games against similarly ranked teams. But for the most part, the Vikings, I think, are in a spot where, they were able to play, Andy Dalton, right, for the Saints. They were able to play Skylar Thompson, right, for the Dolphins. The only team, by the way, who has a winning record that they've beaten, right, is the Dolphins. But that was with their third string quarterback playing, right? They're a team that has played like Justin Fields, and now I can add to the list of bad quarterbacks Aaron Rodgers.
Hey, that must feel really nice.
It's something. Yeah, it feels good. Feels good. Yeah. But they've played backup quarterbacks or quarterbacks who are struggling a lot, primarily. And so it's difficult to get a sense of the team. And then when you take into, especially DVOA, which adjusts for the quality of opponent, when you take into account, how well they create first downs, how well they stop first downs from opponents on defense. I mean, they're not, a remarkable team in that capacity. They give up a ton of leads, right? They gain leads, which is great. They're the best first drive team in the NFL in offense. But they give up these, multi-scored leads by the third quarter, and then they have to bring them back in the fourth quarter. And a lot of these fourth quarter comebacks are not because, hey, we figured out the opponent. We know kind of what they want to do in these situations, and now we're going to attack them. We know that Justin Jefferson can do this, so we're going to do that. It's not like that, or most of the time it's not like that. Sometimes it's like, hey, man, they muffed a punt, and now we have the ball at the 10. That's not really replicable, right? Mm-hmm. Like you can't. They have, I think, 3 turnovers in the fourth quarters forced on special teams, right?
I think like 6 out of the 7 wins or 1 score wins.
Yeah. 6 out of their 7 wins are all 1 score. The other one is that third string, or not third string. The other one is the Packers game week 1, right? That's the multi-score game. Right. Which it's not just that the Packers are struggling. It was also a week 1 Packers game, which under Matt LaFleur has been remarkably disastrous, right? It was like 45-3 against the Saints, 1 or 2 years ago. Yeah. So it is difficult to get a good understanding of the team, but there is something to be said about a team that when they're down 1 or 2 scores in the fourth quarter finds ways to win, right? There is something there. But I just think that when you take a look at historically at teams that have a bunch of 1-score games, a lot of them coming in fourth quarter comebacks, do they have the ability to replicate that in the second half of the season? Historically, the answer is no. And for the teams that did, they don't do very well necessarily in the playoffs. I think, one of the famous exceptions are the Joe Flacco Ravens, right? I don't know how many times you can count on that to be your pattern of victory.
Yeah, unless those 4 happen in the playoffs, that's the only time.
Yeah, right, exactly. Unless you can throw it to running back on 4th and 28 and convert it,
Yeah. Catch it off a helmet, whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, normal stuff. Normal
stuff. So let's dive in a little bit here into the matchup itself. And, I'm going to go with the Bills offense and this Vikings defense. And starting up front, obviously there's a name that is very familiar to Bills fans. Harrison Phillips was our multi-year NFL Man of the Year candidate, just an awesome person in the community, and was kind of coming into his own a little bit as a player, like would have flashes, but didn't really come forward. Now as a part, I love this front where you go through. I wanted the Vikings to be crazy and to move Danielle Hunter, because I would love to have snagged a player like that. We turned out okay with Von Miller. That turned out fine.
Yeah, Von Miller's all right.
Yeah, it's fine. You'd be like that kind of thing. But then you add in, the signing of Dalvin Tomlinson, the fleecing of stumbling into Zadarius Smith that they ended up getting is just such a weird circumstance of having.
Ravens don't make many mistakes.
It's crazy that the way that was set up that way, but it's really come into a nice overall defensive line that they can rotate through, and having Phillips and Tomlinson, Hunter and Smith, that 4 has just been really ferocious to be able to set things up. Is that, I think the investments they've seen there seem to have paid off. Is it coming together as well as what the numbers show?
Yeah, and I think so. And I think one of the things that has really stood out to me is, early on in the season, Danielle Hunter wasn't getting a lot of pressure. He wasn't generating any sacks. He certainly wasn't getting pressure. When I was watching him play, I thought, I don't know, on film, I mean, this seems fine, right? Like, it doesn't seem amazing, right? I mean, Danielle Hunter's the fastest player to 50 sacks by age in NFL history, right? Like, there's a standard, right? But I was watching him and I was like, seems to be playing well. I don't know why the numbers aren't there, right? And so, we asked, the defensive coordinator, like, hey, what's up with this? Danielle Hunter's kind of supposed to be a game record. Zadarius Smith, fantastic work, good job, plod. But like, the point is that you have 2, right? The point is that it's overwhelming what you can do with this level of pressure, and it's not there, right? And he brought up an interesting point. Well, Danielle Hunter's switching positions, kind of, but switching systems, right? And he's switching from a 4-3 defensive end to a 3-4 outside linebacker, right? And for the most part, those 2 positions should be compared when it comes to determining who's good at what and all that, right? But in terms of what an individual player can do, it's a different set of techniques, and that player has to adapt to that different technique. And the Vikings actually saw this when they traded for Yannick Ngakoue a couple of years ago from a 3-4 system into a 4-3 system. He did not produce in a 4-3 system, and then he went to a 3-4 system after that. After the Vikings traded him back to the Ravens, right? And he did fine there, right? It's where it's stuff like where your front foot is, it's how many yards away you are from, all of these technical details that separate the 2 positions in terms of kind of what you're asking of them, but not in terms of the ultimate skill set that's going to be demanded of him. And he has that ultimate skill set. And the last couple of games, it seems like he's made that switch. It took a while for him to get online, and now he is wrecking things. He's doing a really great job. And if you take a look at kind of who he's lined up against at right tackle, PFF has this really wonderful chart. I think PFF _Moo, Timo Risk tweeted it out. This wonderful chart where you've got the strength of opponent, right, that pass rusher is up against, and the performance above expectation based on the strength of opponent they have. Danielle Hunter has the highest strength of opponent in terms of the right tackles he's up against. People like Ryan Ramczyk and Lane Johnson, right? Like not these off the bench tackles, right? And so that's part of it too. And he's been able to produce despite that. And he's well above that line based off the expectation, despite how difficult that early season stretch has been for him. Right. And Elton Jenkins, I think was his week 1 right tackle. Like, it is rough to go up against that group.
Good Lord.
So that pass rush unit has come into its own. Dalvin Tomlinson, especially, he had a little bit of an injury scare a bit ago with I think his calf or his hamstring. But he has been remarkable. He's always been a great run stuffer. I've always been concerned about his ability to generate pass rush. He has been able to put in a lot of good pass rush reps over the past couple of weeks. He has been fantastic. And then, of course, Harrison Phillips. I think you all know how good he is. I asked a bunch of Bills guys. I think I asked you, Greg, hey, this Harrison Phillips guy, what should I know about him? Praise universally from everybody I asked. he was even better than I expected, even after all of that.
Yeah.
So he's been a really great addition to the roster as well. So that front four is doing a lot for the Vikings defensively. The Vikings defense isn't really good right now, but that front four is doing really well.
I was going to say that it leads to my next question, and the one player I'll narrow in on this second unit is, the last year or two, you've started to get Eric Kendricks into these discussions with Darius Leonard, with Fred Warner, with that level of Bobby Wagner type linebacker. And from afar, obviously not going through every single game, it seems like we're not seeing that same level of play this year, which confuses me when the front is playing well. Like when you have the front playing well, that's supposed to translate well to the linebacker role. Why do you think we're not seeing that same level of performance that we've seen in the past from a guy who was, being talked about at the elite level of linebacker play?
Yeah, I think there's two reasons for that. One, I think, is the way the Vikings front played in terms of what they were asked to do under Zimmer versus what they're asked to do under Donatel. For the final couple of years in the Zimmer tenure, the three techniques would basically play like nose tackles. They would not really rush upfield, and they would keep the linebackers clean, right? And that would allow linebackers to go and make plays. This isn't to say, of course, that Eric Kendricks wasn't playing at a really high level. He was, right? But it does make it a little bit easier when guards aren't in your face, right? So I think that's one. But two, the problem, I think, is kind of that the Vikings know how good he is. And by that, I mean they ask him to do a bunch of really impossible stuff. And half the time he does it. Right? That's the crazy part. But it doesn't look good because the other half of the time he's not doing it, right? He's covering a slot on a crosser route and he's falling behind. And it's like, well, yeah, that guy runs a 4.4. I don't know like what Kendricks is going to be able to. Kendricks is really fast for a linebacker. He's not a 4.4 guy, right? So I mean that's some of it too. And I think that when you kind of account for how difficult the job has been for him, how deep he has to when they play, they don't play Tampa 2 very often, right? Who does? But when they do have that linebacker, you shove all the way backfield, right, and cover a tight end or something like that. That's him. He's covering 20 yards downfield against some deep throwers, right? And it's like, okay. I mean, Harrison Smith is blitzing. What else are you going to do, right? Like it's ultimately it's a good play design, but it makes things really difficult individually for someone like Eric Kendricks. So I think that that's part of it too. I think that he's playing well. I don't think he's playing at the Fred Warner level right now. I don't want to say that all these excuses tell us that he's secretly an elite linebacker that is just being hamstrung by the things that are being asked of him. But Jordan Hicks is not playing very well. I mean, he played lights out against the Cardinals, revenge game and all that, right? But for the most part, he hasn't been playing all that well, and Kendricks is covering up for a lot of what he has to do, right? I'm not saying he's secretly like an elite linebacker, but he's playing very well, and it is just really difficult for him to come up with these really splash plays that have characterized a lot of what he's been able to do. He's still getting stops, right? He's still like in the run game. He's still doing a good job getting to the line of scrimmage, bringing the ball carrier down. But his game is generally coverage. Like he's had some highlight interceptions basically every year he's been in the league, and we're not seeing as much of that. And I think it's because it's just they're asking him to play nickel, corner, and safety and linebacker all at once.
So going into the secondary here, obviously you got the two pieces that everybody knows that are kind of defying father time here, where we just continue to see top level play out of both Patrick Peterson and Harrison Smith. But some of the names that maybe Bills fans aren't as familiar with, we did a fair amount of work on Cam Dantzler when he was coming out, but guys like Cameron Bynum that I don't think people are super familiar with. How is the secondary as a whole coming together, the amount of snaps that are being asked for from a Chandon Sullivan and guys like that I don't know if they were planning on having play that many snaps coming into the year?
Yeah. Well, Chandon Sullivan, I think they actually planned on him being the starting slot, which I think is kind of a mistake. They drafted two corners, right? They drafted a guy that should have gone in the first round, if not for injury, with Andrew Booth. And they drafted a fairly talented fourth round corner to Caleb Evans. Neither of them are slot guys, right? And so you've got, somebody like Cameron Dantzler, who's basically an outside guy. Patrick Peterson, who you could probably ask him to play in the slot, but I just feel like generally speaking, you don't. It's kind of one of those situations. And then you have Chandon Sullivan, right? And Sullivan struggled a lot last year for the Packers. A year before that, he was actually fairly good in the slot. But last year in the Packers, he struggled. They thought they might be able to find a cheap guy, coach him up the right way, and he's been struggling a lot. I think when I last checked his specific numbers 2 weeks ago, he led the league in slot yards given up. Right? Like, I mean, that's not great. And so, that becomes a problem. Individually, we're seeing a bunch of really great plays from players like Patrick Peterson, Harrison Smith, of course. Cameron Bynum's had some highlight plays, and Cameron Dancer has been, I think, the most fun player in the secondary to watch, right? He has had some extraordinary highlights, whether it's, forced fumble here, a pick here, a deflection for a pick there, against some really high-level receivers. But I'm talking about his highlights, right? He also has some lowlights to go with it, right? And it's not a situation where it's like Trevon Diggs or Marcus Peters where they gamble a lot, right? And then they get burned when they gamble, and when they don't get burned, they get the pick. It's more that Cameron Dancer is having, or had, I don't know if this is true anymore, because he's had a pair of really good games. But it's been having a lot of difficulty figuring out what his assignments are within the defense. When he knows his assignment, he seems to be playing pretty well, but he's been making a lot of mistakes. And it's making players like Cameron Bynum look worse than they are because they're covering for his mistakes, or making players like Chandon Sullivan, who, again, he's not playing very well, look worse than he is because they're covering for his mistakes. And so, that situation has created a lot of big problems. And the defense generally is not in sync on the back end. Like, Harrison Smith is playing really well. There's only so much he can do. Patrick Peterson is playing really well in some games and all right in other games. And he has benefited, I think, from a fair amount of luck, which it hurts me to say, right? Because Patrick Peterson's such a legendary player. Right. But that Packers game, if Christian Watson, knew how to catch the ball, right?
80-yard touchdown or whatever.
That's an 80-yard touchdown, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you go back and look at the all-22 on that game, Aaron Rodgers was just done with Watson, right? He just stopped looking at him, and Watson was getting open. This rookie who, by the way, missed training camp, right? Like, he just did not have time, right? This rookie, this guy who athletically compares to Julio, right? Like, I don't want to just be like, yeah, this random guy from North Dakota State. Athletically, he's phenomenal, right? But he's getting open against Patrick Peterson, and Rodgers is just like, I don't have time for that. I don't need that in my life. You dropped one, I'm done, right? And that's been happening occasionally throughout the year. Now, the Cardinals game, he played like the best corner I've ever seen. But he was really upset at the Cardinals. In a lot of these games, the Eagles game is another good example where, there's a lot of space that he's giving up that he's not being kind of credited for in terms of the PFF stats. And I'm not saying that he's playing poorly, but the thing is, he seems to be playing like an elite corner. And it just so happens, because of random circumstances, that he probably isn't, right? He's playing as a pretty good corner, but not as an elite corner. And all of this adds up, right? When you've got mistakes from Cameron Dancer, you've got all these slot yards given up by Chandon Sullivan, when you've got, Cameron Bynum, who has some pretty good highlights, but he's still kind of a young safety. They did draft a first-round safety. Now, Cameron Bynum won the starting job fair and square, right? So it's not as if. But, the team was not so confident in Bynum starting, right, that they decided to go in another direction in the first round. So, all of these kind of pile up. You've got mistakes from Jordan Hicks. The pass rush at the beginning of the year was not where it is now. And so that's why the defense has been kind of hit or miss a lot.
Let's switch it over to the other side of the ball here. This is really what I'm excited to see, because whether or not Josh Allen suits up for this one, we know the Bills defense is one of the more elite defenses in the NFL consistently over the last 5 years. We were talking offline a little bit about our guy, Leslie Frazier, and the familiarity there. I'm looking at this offense sort of big picture here. Kevin O'Connell, how you liking this new fit with Kirk Cousins in the offense? Right now, I'm seeing overall DVOA, it's about middle of the pack, 16th overall, 27th overall passing, 8th overall in the rush. Obviously, Bills fans don't want to hear that. How's the fit so far, and how are you liking getting into this new glove?
Culturally, it's a great fit. I think in terms of getting on the same page, it's been really tough. Cousins and O'Connell, I think, see the passing game just a little bit differently.
Okay.
And so I think when that Cousins is a very by the book quarterback, right? Like the textbook has a bunch of answers, right, for how to solve a number of these problems, and he just checks them off, right? And if it's not in the textbook, he's out. Now he has a very expansive textbook to draw from, right? So it's not a huge problem for him, right? His statistics usually every year are really good.
I was going to say, maybe the most consistently productive quarterback of like last 8 years, maybe 8 years here.
Yeah. I mean, he always seems to be undervalued in fantasy circles because he's, not like good, but the statistics
not fun, right? Or sexy, but he
it's efficient.
Yeah, exactly. And so he knows the answers to a lot of tests out there.
Yeah.
But the issue is, he doesn't like to improvise. At least before this year, he's not really great at situational football. When basically the test changes, right? When you go from standard downs to 2 minutes, it's just like, hey man, I know that the middle of the field was open, but there's like 30 seconds left. We're out of timeouts. You don't throw to that guy. Why are you doing that? It's like, well, I mean, he was open, right? The read said,
but the read told me to go.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's kind of how he sees it. And he has been playing a lot looser this year, which is nice to see, but it does not come with a lot of the same passing success we're used to seeing. Like you said, middle of the road DVOA. And I think a lot of that just comes from O'Connell wants him to kind of chew through the first read a little bit slower. And when you mess with a quarterback's clock, it takes a little bit of time to get everything kind of back. I mean, we saw the same thing with Josh Allen, right? They messed with his clock. It worked out in the end, but it was a rough way there. And a lot of times Cousins is basically kind of Case Keenum-ish, actually, to bring it together. It's just, you know what? Justin Jefferson's somewhere over there, right?
There's a bunch of that on film.
So that's the issue. And when they get it together, they'll distribute, I think, the ball a little bit more equitably to really talented receivers. They're getting open again. All 22. You take a look at Adam Thielen, open. Right.
Well, I got a question about Thielen, though, because it feels like the heat on him has cooled off over the last couple of years. And I don't get it, because every time I turn on the Vikings, this guy is consistent. He again, talk about consistency at a position, might be one of the most consistent wide receivers in the NFL over the last few years. Like, it just always seems to be getting open. Why doesn't he? When it was he and Diggs, there was a lot of love, but then Jefferson came in, and obviously he's an elite receiver in himself, but Thielen just doesn't ever seem to get the love he deserves in this league.
Yeah, well, for 2 years ago, he got hurt, and then last year he got hurt a little bit, and we saw a drop off in his athletic capabilities as a result of those injuries.
Yeah.
Now this year, I think he has it back. I think that his athleticism.
He looked good to me.
Yeah. So I don't think it was an aging thing. I think it was just he was dealing with some injuries. And, you take a look at the before and the after injury, and there's a clear difference in the way that he was playing. Yeah. Now that he has that kind of speed and agility back, and that strength certainly back, you have to ask, why isn't he producing as much as he typically would be or has been? And I think it's the same thing that I was describing, is that Cousins is having a lot of difficulty working this offense the way it needs to be worked. Thielen is getting open a lot. You just take a look at kind of what even the broadcast footage you're seeing it, but you just take a look at kind of what the coach's film is telling you, and Thielen is getting open, and either the read's not there, right? That the half field read told me to go this way, and
sorry, Adam.
Yeah, it's like that's you're not in the play now. I hope you love football, because that's what you're playing for. But yeah, sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's the throw is a little bit off, because again the chemistry, because of the way that this offense has changed things, the chemistry is just a little bit off in terms of ball placement and what's how receivers are reading option routes against certain defenses. They seem to be kind of some disagreement between the way Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, or Kirk Cousins and Thielen see the way that field operates. So that's primarily it. I think Thielen individually is playing actually quite well. Yeah. It's just that the ball's not going to him, and that's a problem they need to solve, because 180 yards to Jefferson is great, but 150 yards to Jefferson and 100 yards to Thielen is better.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, so I got a question, sort of philosophy wise, going against a team like the Bills. I see the Vikings have a lot of sort of the blueprint to attack a Bills defense, right? On the run game, obviously we know that's good. We don't have to spend a lot of time talking about Dalvin Cook. I think everybody knows the threat there. We could spend a little bit of time, but really it's getting the ball out fast. And I do think Kirk Cousins can do that, but the way you're describing the change in this offense, it's sort of muddied that a little bit. As a Bills fan, that gives me a little bit of excitement, because I think this defensive line might be able to get in at Kirk Cousins if he's taking a little bit extra time. The way to beat the Bills, in my opinion, is to get that quick passing game, get that first read, attack this Bills secondary, who tends to play a little bit off. Do you think for this game that they'll sort of dial back to what Kirk does well and getting the ball out fast, or do you think they'll continue to try to make this offense fit?
I think it'll probably be a little bit of both. I mean, the Vikings at least do a pretty decent job in terms of game planning to their opponent. I wouldn't say that, they're at like Kyle Shanahan levels of that or anything like that, but they do a pretty decent job of game planning to their opponent. And I think that when you get to the quick game, a lot of those inconsistencies kind of disappear. I mean, because that's just the way the quick game works, right? It's just kind of more difficult to have that specific kind of problem crop up. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Vikings decided to go quick game. The thing is, the Vikings are this year one of the worst screen teams I've seen. Right, I've seen worse. I remember like the Todd Haley Chiefs. Right, like I've seen worse. But there's some pretty bad moments with the screen game, and they keep going to it, and it's very frustrating to watch. And sometimes when the situation calls for the quick game based on who their opponent is, that means screen to them, which I like, it's not a quick developing play, but has a lot of similar elements to quick game. Right. And so like you're replacing runs with screens or runs with quick game. Right. So I can see kind of, if that becomes something that might be an issue, it seems like they're just trying to brute force the screen problem because they're like, yeah, we got a bunch of great after catch players. Why isn't the screen working? And it's like, well, yeah, you do, but you got to block some guys. I don't know.
Yeah, there's still more
a lot to set it up.
Yeah. So that's a big part of it. But I think that they would probably be able to figure something out along those lines in terms of being able to get that quick game going. The biggest issue is you can still get pressure on the quick game, and if you get pressure up the middle, right? If Ed Oliver is like really feeling it today, right? Then the Vikings interior is bad. Like it's bad. I mean, I like Ezra Cleveland. He had a really bad game last week. I think that he's generally a pretty good guard, but Ed Ingram is having just an awful time out there. He's just not having fun.
I did want to ask you in this offensive line, like looking at the amount of investment over the last 4 years or so in first and second round picks that they've given. Yeah, I mean, it's all 2021 first, 2020 second, 2019 first, 2020 second, or 2022 second, 2018 second. Like this is all top end talent on the offensive line. Is it a little bit frustrating for Vikings fans and people covering the Vikings that you're not getting more of that dominant offensive line, really both in pass game and in the run game? As good as the run game is, I don't know that's because of the offensive line, right? It's because of the super talent you have at running back.
Yeah, I mean, it is frustrating the Vikings, but it's a frustration they're familiar with. The Vikings have not had a good offensive line since 2010. Yeah. Like it's been worse than bottom half. It's generally been bottom 5 every year since 2010. And so it has been really difficult. Like there are moments like 2013, they had a pretty good offensive line, but it's like we're looking at moments, right? Like Joe Berger, this 5th round guy that they signed for free off the Miami Dolphins. He's one of the top 5 centers in the league. Yeah, why not? Right? It's one of those things, right? But they just have not had a good offensive line. The 2015 and 2016 Vikings offensive line, they rival, when the Chargers get injured every year, they rival what that offensive line looks like, right? It's bad stuff. And so this is actually the best offensive line I've seen the Vikings have in a decade.
Yeah, it's funny. We talking about similar discussions of we can still be not that great, and still
this sounds like the Bills
we've had in the wild. But
it does sound like the Bills. Yeah.
It's just not as bad as it's been.
Because the Bills have just been like Deion Dawkins and company, right? It's just like
Mitch Morris and Deion Dawkins, and then patch it all else together. Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, but this year we're seeing a lot. I mean, Christian Darrisaw has been a remarkable find, and you can. I mean, so obviously the Vikings believe a lot in Brian O'Neill. There's no question. They think that he's a top 5 right tackle. They think he could be even better than a top 5 right tackle. Which I was just talking about the right tackles they went up against, so they know what a good right tackle looks like.
Yeah.
And Christian Darrisaw might be playing better than Brian O'Neill, which is just wild. Like the trust that they put in Darrisaw, like the offensive line splits are really striking to me because, very often you'll see all 5 offensive linemen, they're equidistant from each other. And this is drilled, right? I mean, it's not trivial to talk about offensive line splits. Their feet are 6 inches apart when they line up. Like that is, it is precise, right? Except Christian Darrisaw is like 2 feet away. He's not getting any help, right? They're like, hey, man, that guy's a speed rusher. We want you to get to him before he gets to you. You're going to be 2 feet away from the rest of the offensive line. Don't get beat inside. And then he doesn't, right? Like he does his job and he does a great job. He's doing really fantastic. I think in terms of offensive tackle combined PFF grade, the Vikings are number 1. I think that's right. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's certainly they're in the top 3.
Interesting.
They're doing a fantastic job at the offensive line. Christian Darrisaw has been a great find to that effect, and they're asking him to do more. And so the PFF grade, I think, maybe even undersells a little bit of what Darrisaw is doing. That's good. The interior is not so great. Garrett Bradbury, I know, has a high PFF grade. I think he's still struggling, not as much as he did before. He used to be the worst center in the league, but he's still struggling a little bit. Ed Ingram is having a terrible time. Ezra Cleveland, generally pretty good, but he has his games that are not there for him. And so this is the best offensive line this seed. Ed Ingram is still maybe the worst, a bottom 3 guard in the NFL. Like that comes with the territory of the way the Vikings offensive line has evolved over the years.
Yeah, that feels so Billsy to me. It's like I'm talking about John Feliciano all over again. So I do want to get to Dalvin Cook here in a second, but we got to talk about TJ Hawkinson. Big trade, comes over 9 for 9 in his debut.
70 yards,
91% snaps in his first game, like showing up 2 days later.
How excited?
What's the tight end? That can't be that hard.
How excited is this fan base to steal a guy in division and comes out immediately and is productive? And I mean, is this a new way to unlock some of what you were talking about with Kirk Cousins in this offense and giving him another pass catcher in this offense that's sort of always open?
And you can't forget, he grew up a Vikings fan, so he's going to be
good. Skull.
He's got the hair and everything too.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, Hawkinson is a pretty high-level tight end. He's no Darren Waller. He's no Mark Andrews. He's no Travis Kelce. He's very good.
Sorry to interrupt. I've always thought of him more as a George Kittle, where he actually like legitimately can block.
Yeah, he can block.
And is a pretty good receiver, but he's not like the glorified slot receiver some of the other guys are.
And we don't know how productive he can be as a receiver because he's been in Detroit.
Yeah. Right. It's crazy, actually. So he's averaged something like 50 yards a game in Detroit, and which is just remarkable given that like half of his years have been with Jared Goff. This year's he averaged like 56 yards a game in Detroit, despite the fact that the Lions threw the least that they had ever had.
Crazy
with Hawkins. It's just like crazy. Yeah. I mean, he's been productive, and so he can. When we saw him get 70 yards on 2 days of practice for the team, right?
Yeah.
And what's also crazy is that like at least 3 of those receptions were on like 1 yard screens, right? Again, with the screen game, right? And so it's like really 6 for 6 for 73 or something crazy like that. Yeah. And so to have him integrated 91% snap rate, like you said, means a lot. And I think that you're right that it does kind of give Kirk Cousins something else to go with, because a lot of these routes are kind of very similar for the receivers. There's a lot of over routes, a lot of crossing routes, a lot of drag routes. They're all moving kind of horizontally, and having a tight end that can move kind of vertically, not necessarily like 40 yards downfield, but I just mean kind of in terms of the way the momentum works, the way it screws with the way the linebackers have to move and stuff like that. Having him move just kind of vertically gives visually Kirk Cousins something else to work with. And he's very good at catching the ball, right? Yeah. What's interesting, if you ask Lions fans, Hawkinson is surprisingly not that great at blocking. At least he hasn't been the last 2 years. No. Now, of course, if you watched him at Iowa, that's an enormous shock because he was the blocking tight end, right? At Iowa, right? They're basically an offensive lineman who could catch.
Exactly.
And so, but his first 2 years, I thought he was a good blocker. So I think it's maybe something with the Dan Campbell system. And that doesn't necessarily translate. And he blocked well enough for the Vikings. They asked him to pass block, the Washington defensive line. It's pretty good. Yeah. And he did all right. And so, I think that there's a huge amount of versatility that you get in there that you wouldn't have gotten with Irv Smith. And then Irv Smith's probably going to come back a couple of weeks later, and then you'll have both of them. But yeah, it's a lot of versatility. You can check into your run plays, right, when he's on the field and be happy that you're going to get some success running to the strong side.
Yeah, when it's Irv and TJ back, that could be fun for you guys. I like that concept of that athleticism with Hawkinson. All right, now we got to talk about Dalvin Cook. One, I kind of hate how you guys have just been spoiled of just fantastic athletic running backs for like the last 20 years here. Very frustrating, but more so frustrating.
Robert Smith, Adrian Peterson, Dalvin Cook, just bam.
Just terrible for me. No, it's fine. I have no hate towards the Vikings, but coming up against this Bills team over the last 6 quarters, the run defense up until the last 6 quarters has been fantastic this year. This last 6 quarters, not so much. We saw last week copying sort of what the Packers were doing in the run game. I'm very nervous about Dalvin's ability to break plays once he gets into that second level, where some of the other running backs the Bills have faced haven't really had that ability to break the big play outside when they get into the secondary and stuff like that. Dalvin has this ability to totally come in and take the wind out of a field with big plays, both in the pass game and the run game. How is he being used? What do you expect? Is this going to be a game where they just really lean on him against a good Buffalo defense, knowing that that's probably the Achilles heel and the weakness to attack?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in the same way that opponents have attacked Zadarius Smith by running at him, I think that you would attack Von Miller by running at him, right? It's just, it makes sense just in terms of where both players are in a career and the things that they're good at and the things they're less good at. But certainly, like, attacking the edges is something they're very happy to do. They're famously, this whole group of offensive coordinators are very outside zone kind of guys, whether it's McVay or Shanahan or LaFleur or whoever, right? But what's interesting is that the Vikings have probably the most diverse run game out of that group, right? Like if you take a look at, probably the least diverse is probably, the Bengals, right? With Zach Taylor. And I would say that within that Shanahan group, I would say that the Vikings and maybe the Falcons are up there in terms of kind of the most interesting run games that you can put together because they do a lot of gap stuff, which I just did not expect. Going into training camp, all you saw was, outside zone, inside zone, and duo, right? And then, week one against the Packers, half their plays are like gap plays with like power elements to it. And you're just like, what's going on? They ran all over the Packers, right? So it seemed to work. And so it seems like they really kind of relish this idea of adapting the run game to their opponent, which, I talked about earlier is something they want to do in the passing game, but the run game is something that they want to do a lot too. They know that people have that teams have come up with ways to stuff outside zone. A lot of that is by putting 5 people on the line of scrimmage and making those kind of creases really difficult to find for a running back. And then that's when your linebackers move up and, all that. Right. And so in response, you just move your players around so that you've got more players at the point of attack. Right. And that's what power running is. And the Vikings have embraced that and they've done all right with that. What's interesting though, is that Dalvin Cook, who, has been a huge breakaway player in terms of like breakaway percentage, the percentage of yards that he has in big plays, the impact that he has in terms of big runs. For the first half of the season, didn't really have any big runs. He was touchdownless. He didn't have 20+ yard runs. I think halfway through, so I guess a quarter way through the season, but halfway through what we've experienced so far, his longest run was 16 yards. And then he blew a 50-yarder at the end of a game, and it's just been, breakaway city after that.
Yeah.
So he's been able to find that in training camp. I thought this is the fastest he'd looked in years, right? And he'd been suffering from injury. He is not a good back. I shouldn't say not a good back. He's not the same back when he's injured, whether that is a shoulder injury or an ankle injury. He forces himself back onto the field, which, is an admirable quality, but he's just not as effective. And right now, he did have a shoulder injury early in the season, but right now he's playing as if he doesn't. And that, capability, he does have a bit of a fumbling problem, but that capability has been really, really huge. And so they've been able to get him to break runs off of inside runs. Those are less likely to give you giant plays, but also these outside, they love attacking the edges a lot. And they've done a very good job forcing linebackers to get all the way to the sideline and back in order to try and restrict Cook. And it's largely been unsuccessful, especially when you've got a blocker like TJ Hawkinson, or you've got movement capability like the athleticism of Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill.
So all that said, got gone through a fantastic overview of the 2 matchups here. What do you expect to see this weekend, and give us a score prediction?
Is Josh Allen playing?
You're welcome. I'm gonna give, when I do my predictions, I'm gonna give a Case Keenum prediction and a Josh Allen. So you're welcome to do that.
Sure. If Josh Allen is playing, the Vikings lose by probably 10. I think the Vikings are a good team. I just don't think they're in the same category of team. So I think that's and I don't know, they were 7-point favorites when it was uncertain.
Yeah, it was like 7.5.
Yeah. So I think that's probably fair. And then, do you want me to give like a more specific prediction?
Yeah, sure. If you had
31-21. Yeah. The Bills score points. I don't know that the Vikings can consistently score points, especially if they're going to be forced to pass if they're down in a 10-point game. So 31-21. If it's Case Keenum, I mean, I saw the last time he was good. He's not that guy.
When was that? Actually,
it was 2017. It was a while ago.
It was a while ago. Yeah. Bills fans really need to look at back at the last like 4 years of Case Keenum.
Yeah, it's not good. I also saw him in Denver. It was not great. Now he does have Stephon Diggs again. So
yeah, hey.
But I just don't think that it's going to be there for him.
Yeah.
It was a magical season. The entire year, I was like, this is not going to last. This is not going to last. The way he's playing, not going to last.
This is not sustainable.
Yeah. It's like he's throwing contested catches. He's pressured on like 40% of dropbacks. He's inviting pressure. He can't, like one time he threw this just incredible. It was in the middle of the season, so it doesn't get documented all that well. Threw this incredible pass to Adam Thielen. He was under pressure. There's like 3 or 4 guys on him. He throws it up. Adam Thielen catches in stride 40 yards, right? And after the game, we're like, man, how did you know Thielen would be there? And he's like, no, I didn't know anything. No way is this gonna last.
It's literally the opposite of Kirk Cousins of like textbook. Like this is the opposite of textbook.
In Vikings discussions, when we talk about Kirk Cousins, we're like, man, he needs a little bit more Case Keenum. And we say that all the time. That's
too
the
much
player
Case. You don't want too much Case Keenum.
Yeah, we don't want too much, right? We
want
want Kirk Cousins, but just a little bit. Mike Zimmer said Case Keenum's got a pair. Right?
Yeah.
He's got a set of brass balls, I think is the exact quote. And then he was born with like a horseshoe over his head. Like Zimmer also was like, no way is this happening.
Right? Yeah, this is.
But yeah, if Kirk Cousins could just, get one of those brass balls, right? That would be ideal. But no, yeah, they're the exact opposite player, right? And so like Case Keenum was like, no, what do you mean no? I didn't know that. How could I have known Adam Thielen would be there? It's like, why did you throw it? What the
awesome. Love to see it.
So yeah, he's great, and he instantly wins locker rooms, right? People love him, but that's the level of confidence I have in Case Keenum.
Okay.
I don't think it's there. I think he's going to throw some pretty opportune picks if he ends up starting. And so I would say for me that's a Vikings by 3 because the rest of the Bills team is fantastic, right? It's a huge, it's a deep squad. They've already suffered injuries, and it seems like it doesn't even matter, right? At some of the most important positions in football, and it's like, yeah, we'll just throw our first round pick in there instead. It's really your 6th rounder was starting, okay. Yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, the Bills are just a very good team. So I think that even with Case Keenum being the starter, to me, that's like a Vikings by 3 kind of scenario. And I think it's a much lower scoring game. To me, that's probably 24-21, something like that, which covers the spread by like 6, right? Because the Bills are still favored.
It depends. Some books have it all the way down to like 3.5 now. Because I think
3.5
people have
Bills,
think they're sneaking it. Like, oh, well, if Josh isn't in there, we're going to get the value from it. So it kept like inching its way down. I've seen nobody's
the helmet went into his elbow. I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Josh Allen, right? But like, I don't know, man. Even
I'll be surprised if he plays.
Yeah, So to me, that's Vikings by 3. Yeah,
he thinks he will.
Yeah, he's real sure that he's going to play. Sometimes you got to protect people from themselves.
That's it.
So, let the people know what else you got coming up at PFN and anything else to watch for.
Yeah, certainly. You can find all my work at profootballnetwork.com. I got a piece coming up about Justin Fields. He's secretly played pretty well past 3 weeks, right? That's so I kind of want to take a look at that. We pair that with our quarterback power rankings, which are updated every so often. And then we do a mailbag every Friday. So I talk about whatever the readers want me to talk about. Don't know what that is yet.
My prediction of Justin Fields was going to be the best QB out of that class. Not looking bad.
I mean,
it's not a good class.
It's a low bar.
It's not a good class.
It's a low bar.
Look at me.
I'll take my wins where I can get them.
Awesome as always, man. We appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll be able to reconnect and share a drink at Beats this spring.
Oh my God, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thank you for your time, man. We appreciate it.
All right. Peace out.
All right. Yeah, make sure you guys are checking it out. I'll link some of his work here in the show description. Always a very informative guest, a lot of fun to have on, and somebody we need to talk to that often because we don't play the Vikings all that often. And
not a lot.
We can go through a couple of the matchup things here and everything that's there, but it really is weird how much swings and just, is Josh going to play and what version of Josh is going to play if he plays. And it's just impossible to have any other discussion without that hanging over it.
It really is. And prepping for this game, even though I've done barely any because of the Josh Allen injury, my prep is under the assumption that you're rolling with Case Keenum, right? Yeah. If Josh Allen plays, that is fantastic benefit that I'll wake up. Yeah, you're playing with house money. But I'm going to assume going into this game that is Case Keenum. And that makes it really hard to talk about this stuff. Like every single week we go into it and we'll talk about DVOA, we'll talk about all this stuff.
Yeah.
That kind of gets muddied, right? Like you don't know who these two teams are. We have a lot of good data on the Bills with Josh Allen. We have no understanding of what it's going to look like with Case Keenum. So that uncertainty, we talk about nervous mafia, hashtag nervous mafia. That's me all week, man. Because the unknown of what this offense is going to look like, what Case Keenum's going to look like, it's gonna have a long week for Bills Mafia of just the unknown. So that's the problem for me with this matchup, because I don't think the Vikings are 7-1. I know I got killed by this saying the Jets weren't.
Let's show
were a little bit fraudulent. Yeah.
Why you think that?
Well, so right here, we've got to change the way I do that. That doesn't look great. This doesn't look great at all. Here we go. I don't know. Anyways, we'll leave it up. Yeah. So this is DVOA. As you know, this is adjusted for opponent. Right here, this is Buffalo is a clean sweep this week in DVOA. Overall, you've got second overall for the Bills. That hasn't changed. Minnesota is 18th overall. So again, a 7-1 team that's 18th overall according to DVOA. That's adjusted for opponent. That means they don't truly believe Minnesota is who their record says they are. Offense overall, the Bills did drop down. I think it was 2 spots to 6th overall. Vikings again are 16th. That's right middle of the pack. Bills defense has stayed right where they were, even though everybody was a little bit mad at that one drive last week. They stayed right where they are at 4th overall in defensive DVOA. Minnesota 19th. Again, we're not used to seeing, because of Zimmer all these years, we're not used to seeing a Minnesota defense sort of hang out late in the 20s like that. And then special teams. This is one that in a Case Keenum type game could be something that maybe brings it back towards Buffalo a little bit. You've got the 5th overall special teams going up against the 25th overall special teams. We know the precedent that Sean McDermott puts on that, and this would be the type of game where that presents itself.
Yeah, it's obviously much of our DVOA, the offensively for sure, is Josh Allen. But the special teams and defense is still,
the defense is for real
there. Right? So that one is a huge answer. And I know, that last drive really challenged kind of, the pride of that defense, and that they weren't able to get off the field. And I'm curious to see, Eric did some good breakdowns about, rush lanes, about their, being able to maintain that kind of discipline and where they're at. And that, obviously, hopefully we see a shift from Jaquan Johnson to Dean Marlowe. But they were trying to guess. They were trying to throw, some different run blitzes at them to try to change that up. I'm really curious to see if we see that again. How much of that was because it was Zach Wilson and they thought they could afford to throw run blitzes at them, and how much of that was a shift in, something that we see, because obviously some of the things, good discussion with Warren Sharp about going through how huge the differentiation is with Kirk Cousins in Minnesota against cover 2 versus single high in man coverage. Right. It's a huge difference. He's, a bottom 3 quarterback against cover 2. So I really hope we see a shift to Dean Marlowe and back to that cover 2 and away from those run blitzes.
It really depends how they're attacking the Bills, right? If they start running the ball, I do think you can have some of the run blitzing be successful in stopping the run, especially if it's maybe Dean Marlowe and not Jaquan Johnson. I think the Bills got in trouble because of Jaquan Johnson. Connor Rogers, I was kind of following up with him this week after what he was watching, and we were talking about how bad Jaquan Johnson looked in that game, and he was saying, like, in the second half, they were really purposefully running towards Jaquan Johnson as a strategy in that game. So even with all that, overall, Bills still are 6th in run defense in the league. So we really got to also pull back and compare against to our peers. This is something Joe Marino talks about all the time. This is something I've been preaching for years, where we get so hyper focused on the Bills and we watch the Bills and we see that drive and we're like, oh my God, this is the worst, right? We have one of the worst run defenses ever. But then when you peel it back and you look, and again, DVOA is a great stat because it adjusts for opponent. The Bills are 6th run defense in the NFL. They dropped 1 spot after that Jets game. And so that Jets game felt terrible, but not all yards are the same. Not all good runs are the same, right? And so this is still an elite level defense by every single measure. It's still going to be a good defense. So I do want to see some of the run blitz stuff, but I do agree you're going to have to account for Cousins this time a little bit differently than you had to account for a Zach Wilson at quarterback, and also the weapons, right?
For sure. And one difference was a pretty big gap in the home and road difference for DVOA. So maybe talk about that one a little bit.
Yeah, so this one, again, I just poke around to see. I think this one could come into play with or without Josh necessarily because of the defensive side of the ball. So Buffalo at home, DVOA is second overall in the NFL, and Minnesota on the road is 25th. And so I don't know why it is that these two teams have these home and away splits like that, but that's real. Buffalo does not have this big of a swing when they go on the road. If you go from Minnesota's 5th overall at home to go from 5th to 25th, that's like years ago when the Steelers couldn't win on the road at all. Like there's something going on there.
Bills only 2nd to 7th.
Yeah, it goes. Yeah, they go 2nd to 7th. Like that's not a big swing. That's sustainable. And I think that's probably to some of Arf's concerns of, is this team sustainable? Like you see a statistic like that, you're going to play half your games on the road. If you're performing at a low clip on the road, at some point, those road games are going to catch up with you. Real quick, back to the defensive point you made too. I do want to harp on this a little bit, not only to compare to our peers, Greg, but I want to pose a question to you and to really everyone out here in the comments. Put it in the comment section on YouTube or whatever at me. Is run defense in 2022 all that important? Like if you're going to have a flaw to your team, like I think it's run defense is the flaw that you want. If you had to pick one thing, like look at, these are the top run defenses according to DVOA. This is top 10 in order: Washington Commanders, Tennessee Titans, Los Angeles Rams, San Francisco, Indy, Buffalo, New Orleans, Seattle. Like Buffalo's the only legitimate. Then San Francisco,
maybe San Fran, so there's a limit, I will say, because Brandon Staley believes that run defense doesn't matter and that it's a pass league and that you literally want to invite the run, and that I want to be so far the other direction with like 5-man boxes that I force you to run the ball. And he's gone so far that direction that they're giving up like 5.7 yards a carry or something insane, where it's like, hey, you're giving up so much where it's almost as efficient as low end passing offenses. But in general, the run, every handoff is a gift to the defense, because the likelihood of success, the average yards per play, the likelihood of a successful play, the EPA outcomes, everything, like it's way more efficient to pass the ball. It's why the best offenses pass the ball 80% of the time. So anytime you can get the defense to run the ball, in general, it's a good thing. There's less likelihood of a positive outcome when they run the ball. So even though 4 and 5 yard carries feel like a defeat, the average pass play is more than 4 or 5 yards. The average pass play is 7 to 8 yards. So it's that kind of, logic of doing that. Now, ideally, you're still able to get off the field. You're still able to end drives. You're still able to dare them not to be able to finish. And that, we had some of that with the Jets where they were able to, hold them to field goals and things like that to keep them in there. And we've had that in some other opportunities. But it's still, I get it that it feels bad. And that the one thing that it does risk is the Bills benefit from having, if both teams have more possessions, that benefits the Bills, because the Bills are going to score on more of their possessions than the other team. So fewer possessions increases the variance in the outcome, and that benefits the other team, the underdog. So that's the one thing that if you're able to milk the clock and you reduce the amount of times the Bills have the ball and the amount of times Josh Allen has the ball, that benefits the other team, because then all you need is 1 or 2 fluky plays, and it didn't net out because they have 11, 12, 13 possessions. If all of a sudden you only have 7 or 8, you can't make up for it as much as the other one. So they're kind of combining those two things, that, hey, it isn't as efficient, it isn't as good, but it keeps the ball out of your hands, and we're going to roll the dice that works out for us.
All right, man. Well, we had some other stuff planned, but we're running.
Yeah,
we got to chatting. So I'm going to put you on the spot first.
Okay.
I already told you I'm doing a Josh Allen prediction and a Case Keenum prediction. You're welcome to do that too, but you don't have to. You can do whatever you want.
I have no idea. I just have no idea. It's been such a painful process to go through here. I said it earlier in the show. I don't believe that we'll see Josh Allen this week. And I'll take that a step further. I hope we don't see Josh Allen this week. Like I want him to be right in January. I want him to be right in February. I don't care if he's right on February 12th. I just don't. Like I don't need him to be right on Sunday. I need him to be right in January.
November 12th. November 12th. You said February 12th. I want him still good in February.
Oh no, I very much want him right in February 12th.
Yeah.
November 12th here. I don't care if he's right and ready. So I hope they save him from himself. I don't want to see him try to struggle through grip issues and grabbing at his forearm and freaking us out about whether he went too early or too quickly. So I hope we see Case Keenum, and if we see Case Keenum, I think we are going to have to scrap out a tougher game because I think Arif's right. I think that Case will play within himself, but he's also going to throw some balls up that we probably don't want thrown up. And that I think if they do that, we can pull together, a capable win. But if it's Case Keenum, I think it's going to be a little bit uglier. And I think it's going to be like, I think the Bills can pull this out. I think they could do like 20-16. And I think it's going to be lower scoring than people like, more field goals than people like. But I'm going to go Bills 20, Vikings 16, because I think it's going to be Case Keenum.
Yeah, man.
And if it's Josh Allen, it's 56-3.
Yeah, I can't argue with that either. I agree. I don't want Josh Allen to play in this game, even if he feels like he's fine, can grip the ball, all those things. Yeah. Give it a week. Ligaments, I've learned, unfortunately, through my own personal experience here the last couple of weeks and watching videos of Josh Allen, I've learned enough about ligaments that time is a benefit, right? Time and keeping it immobile is a benefit. In this Vikings game, all games matter. Next game is the most important, blah, 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 whatever the team has to say. All that's true. But also the Vikings game doesn't matter as much as some of the other games, right? Like not all losses are equal. Yep. A potential loss to an NFC opponent doesn't matter as much as the upcoming games against the Patriots, Jets, and Miami Dolphins.
That division run is important.
Yeah, that 3-game division run is where we need Josh Allen the most. So if that's sitting this week and ramping back up, I actually think this day-to-day bleeds into the same anxieties and stuff going next year. I'm good.
Sit him for Minnesota, Cleveland, and Detroit. Sit him for all 3.
I'm in that camp where if it's questionable, go that route and then get him ready for that Patriots game. And then you got a little bit of a mini stretch there. I think after that Patriots game, you get a little bit of a nice rest for him. So get him ramped up for those division games is where I'm at. But long story short, you don't change much. If you lose this game to the Vikings, it's like a 3% drop in playoff percentage. You do lose 15% on the bye, but you can make that up by beating your division later in the season there. So this game, Greg, with Case Keenum, I still think I don't totally believe in the Vikings. And I firmly believe that the Bills have an elite top 5 defense. DVOA backs it up. And I think for all those things that Case Keenum will struggle in this game, I believe what Arif saying, I think he's going to struggle. He's going to take terrible sacks. I think you could see strip sacks. I think you could see balls being deflected up. I think it will be chaotic and out of control if Case Keenum's in this game. But I also think that's going to be the case a little bit for Kirk Cousins against this Buffalo Bills defense. So I think that stuff sort of evens out a little bit here. I see a scenario where the Bills could still win this game 20-17 with home field advantage, with the better special teams. I think you get a play or two in teams, maybe something like that. Hines,
big play.
Somebody's going to make a big explosive play in this game. They still are. Minnesota's defense is 31st against, according to DVOA, against number 1 wide receivers. So if Case Keenum's going to have success, it's going to be quick passing game to Steph Diggs and feed on that 12, 13 targets to Diggs until you get some success. All it's going to take is 1 or 2 good sustained scoring drives to be the team that wins a game like this. So I still have faith that they can win this game. Don't be shocked if Case Keenum plays and the Bills lose this game. And it is not the end of the world. trust me, this losing to the Vikings is not it. This is the loss you want to take. There's either the Vikings or the Bears. If you got to pick a loss remaining schedule, take one of those. So that's where I'm at with that. If Josh Allen plays, I would have it 38-20, and I don't think he would be playing too much into the fourth quarter of this game. I really don't. I don't believe in the Vikings all that much, and I really wish Josh was there and the Bills were healthy, because I think they'd walk right all over.
Yeah, could have a really fun game.
It could be.
So, obviously there's been a weird cloud over the entire fan base. We get the anxiety from everybody, not only an ugly game on Sunday, but now coming into it with this situation. It's really brought a lot of things into perspective. So let's hopefully get everything right here, have a chance to be able to get our bearings back and get back on our winning ways, and, get right for the time of year that matters. We talked about it in some other settings. We're in a weird position for the first time as a fan base where an awful lot of this regular season doesn't matter all that much. Whether they have 11, 12, 13, whatever, how many wins isn't going to matter. All that's going to matter, did you win the 3 or 4 in the playoffs when it really mattered? So right now, that's kind of put this back in perspective. We need to get to the playoffs in a reasonably healthy manner and then be playing well when it gets there. Yeah. And this is simply another hurdle in the way of getting to that point.
How insane is it that we just spent an hour and 5 minutes talking about a game coming up this week, and we haven't even talked about an all-pro cornerback coming back to this. That's how busy of a crazy week this has been, that we haven't had a chance to really celebrate Trey White coming back.
So, well, one-on-one matchups in practice with Stephon Diggs, seeing pictures and clips of that. It's going to be fantastic. So, one quick thing, an exciting new partnership we want to share with you guys. We have actually worked in a partnership with BetUS, and I'll show you guys this ad that we put together for them. Hey guys, Cover One is excited to announce our new partnership with BetUS. BetUS has a live wagering on all major games, the best betting variety in the business, and an easy deposit and withdrawal process with the fastest payouts in the industry. Our loyal Cover One fans get a choice between 2 exclusive offers, either a 125% sign-up bonus on your first deposit up to $2,500, or a free $50 bet with no deposit required. Just use promo code COVER1 on the links provided in the show description below. BetUS, where the game begins. Man, that read was so
good. You did a really good job.
That's really good.
You read well.
So, we're excited about being able to work with them, and I only have to wait a little while longer here. I'm actually allowed to do legal sports betting in the state of Ohio as of January 1st.
How much did that cost you in lobbying? Were you like the main lobbying group of Ohio?
Yeah, I have my own apartment down in Columbus.
You started your own CPAC or whatever to just get gambling sports betting allowed.
Well, so how are you going to get through the rest of this week?
Well, I was going to say, in order to keep Greg's sports betting, now that he's allowed to do that, make sure that you head over to Cover One and sign up for One Pass Club access. You get access to the Slack channel. More and more people are coming over to the Slack channel. Everyone's scared about Twitter, what's going on with Twitter. So they're coming to the Slack channel for refuge. And it is a safe haven for Bills fans to come. You're still going to get all the news. You're going to get all that, but you get the really good community, access to film, access to all the content creators here at Cover One. And plus, if you're a Cover One premium member, you get this awesome shirt. If you're watching here on YouTube, you can tell you get this cool shirt. I got a bunch of people sending me pictures of the decals, them putting them on their fridge, on their car, stuff like that. And it helps to keep shows like ours and our whole team here at Cover One continuing to give you DVOA, all the type of stats and insight that we give you each and every week. All of that comes from your contributions of being a One Pass member. So we appreciate it.
Means a lot.
Yeah, man.
So, make sure you're checking it out. It's really there. And, you talk about weeks like this where everybody is, pushing for all the newest information. The Slack channel is the place to be. Like, if you want to know, like, anyone who's sharing any interesting video, you found an awesome video of a doctor that was explaining, like, with really cool graphics.
Actually, somebody sent that in Slack. Yeah. That's how I found it. Somebody else found it. So honestly, like, a lot of the times, I know, Greg, you're the same way. Content that we end up sharing on Twitter other people are sharing that to us on Slack. So Slack members are getting that stuff first, and then Twitter people are getting that secondary.
Yeah. Go in and find a way to be able to do that. It's the place to be. But ultimately, just try to be good to each other this week. It's been stressful. It's been difficult. Hopefully we have our leader back to us soon.
Watch out for check marks.
Yeah, the weird
Stay
Twitter
safe
stuff,
out there with
weird
the
check marks, all kinds of weird stuff going on Twitter. But ultimately, we appreciate you guys. The chat was great tonight. We'll be looking forward to going live immediately after this game with our Cover One post game show. So make sure you're checking everything out there. But on behalf of Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Tompsett. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.